In the final years of World War II, when the world believed the battlefield had already revealed every machine war could invent, a strange, canvas-covered box with spinning blades quietly made its way into the conflict. To soldiers on the ground, it looked like an experiment that didn't belong in war. To those who flew it, it looked like trouble waiting to happen. Yet inside the jungles of Burma, this awkward whirlybird would attempt something no aircraft had ever done before. And its pilot, an unassuming former journalist from New Jersey, was about to step into a moment that would define the birth of helicopter combat aviation. What unfolded in April 1944 would test the limits of a fragile machine, the courage of one pilot, and the desperate hope of four men trapped behind Japanese lines. By 1943, words like whirlybird and egg beater had become casual lingo among a handful of young men who traveled to the Sikorsky factory in Stratford, Connecticut. They were there to learn how to maintain and fly the U.S. Army's first helicopter, the YR-4B. The aircraft hardly inspired confidence. It looked more like a canvas-wrapped crate with rotors than something meant to survive a battlefield. But the Army believed it could save lives. Among the recruits was Second Lieutenant Carter Harman, a quiet man who never fit the image of a hardened soldier. He had grown up in New Jersey, spent his time writing about music for the New York Times, and had flown only small civilian planes, a Piper Cub and a Waco biplane. When war broke out, he feared being drafted into the infantry, so he signed up for the Army Air Corps. After earning his wings, he became a biplane instructor before being asked to volunteer for helicopter training. To him, it felt like a chance to get a little closer to home. The training group was small, 5 pilots and a handful of mechanics led by crew chief Jim Phelan. Their instructor was Sikorsky's fearless test pilot, Jimmy Viner, a man whose confidence in the helicopter exceeded everyone else's combined. Under Viner's guidance, the first class of Army helicopter pilots graduated in late 1943. The pilots, Harman, John Beeson, Bert C. Powell, Frank M. Turney, and Captain Jack Beigel, became the United States' first operational line helicopter pilots, preceded only by a few test flyers. In October 1943, Harman became the 7th Army pilot ever to solo a helicopter. He didn't know then that this strange new craft would carry him into one of the most dangerous missions of the war. While these helicopters were being born in Connecticut, the 1st Air Commando Group was reshaping the air war in Burma. They were an unruly, independent band of pilots who answered only to their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Philip "Flip" Cochran, who took orders directly from President Franklin D. Roosevelt. These Air Commandos supported the eccentric British Brigadier Ord C. Wingate, and their mix of aircraft, from P-51 Mustangs to C-47 Skytrains, made them a force like no other. In February 1944, the Commandos requested helicopters. A decision was made to send 3 YR-4Bs from the Sikorsky factory. The journey to Asia was chaos from the start. Phelan and his team loaded the first YR-4B into a C-46 only to crash the transport at Baltimore. They repaired the helicopter, repaired the C-46, and tried again. Emergency landings followed in Charlotte, Florida, South America, Ascension Island, Africa, Egypt, the Suez, and Karachi. There, under brutal heat and grit, mechanics reassembled the helicopter with almost no tools. But tragedy struck immediately. On March 21, 1944, during the first helicopter flight, the YR-4B crashed, killing pilot Bert C. Powell, the first American helicopter pilot to die in a combat zone. Soon after, pilot John Beeson was wounded by ground fire while flying a transport aircraft. By early April 1944, only one qualified helicopter pilot remained in the entire China-Burma-India theater, Second Lieutenant Carter Harman. While Harman watched his helicopter being reassembled, another disaster was unfolding. On April 21, 1944, an L-1 Vigilant rescue plane piloted by Technical Sergeant Ed Murphy Hladovchak crashed behind Japanese lines while carrying 3 wounded British soldiers. They were isolated in a rice paddy surrounded by thick jungle and enemy patrols. Another liaison plane located them, but the terrain made any landing impossible. The 4 men were stranded, injured, exhausted and certain they would either be captured or die where they lay. 500 miles away at Lalagat, Harman received a telex from the commando base at Aberdeen with 4 words that had never been sent before in American military history: "Send the egg beater in." The YR-4B's range was only 100 miles. The mission would require nearly 600. It meant climbing over 5,000-foot mountains, flying alone across regions full of Japanese troops, and depending entirely on an engine that had been used previously in washing machines. But there was no other option. Harman loaded 4 jerry cans into the empty co-pilot's seat, placed a stretcher behind him, and took off. His trip became a marathon of endurance. He flew to Dimapur, refueled from his own gas cans, then pushed on to Jorhat, a bomber base filled with B-24 Liberators. After an overnight stay, he flew onward to Taro, where mechanics installed an extra fuel tank borrowed from an L-5 inside the helicopter's thin fuselage. Even so, he would need to land repeatedly to transfer fuel. Meanwhile, deep in the jungle, Murphy and the British soldiers struggled for survival. The Japanese were close enough for their voices and leggings to be seen through the undergrowth. Mosquitoes swarmed. Heat suffocated them, and their wounds grew worse by the hour. Messages dropped by L-5 aircraft told them to climb toward higher ground, but they could barely walk. Harman finally reached Aberdeen on April 25th. Supplies were still being dropped to the stranded men, but the white parachute they used for signaling was now a beacon that could draw the Japanese straight to them. Harman learned he would need to fly 4 separate extractions, 1 man at a time, each trip through territory where a single bullet could tear the helicopter apart. Harman flew from Aberdeen to a sandbar near a riverbank secured by British commandos. There, he met an L-5 that guided him to the crash site. When Murphy saw the helicopter descending, he nearly lost control from shock. He had never seen such a machine before. Harman set the YR-4B down in the clearing amid swirling dust and debris. Murphy loaded the most severely wounded soldier aboard. The helicopter strained, vibrated, and fought to lift off. Harman barely made it to the sandbar, where a liaison plane evacuated the man to safety. He returned for the second soldier, flying low and watching the jungle for signs of enemy movement. Again, he made it out. But then the engine gave a violent clunk. The Warner engine had overheated and seized. Harman was trapped on the sandbar, vulnerable, exposed, and uncertain whether the stranded men could survive another night. Japanese troops were rumored to be close. The engine steamed, hissed, and refused to start. The night dragged on endlessly as Harman lay beside the silent machine, wondering if the rescue would fail. At dawn, with mist hanging low over the river, he tried the engine again. It started. He flew back into the jungle to retrieve the 3rd soldier and carried him to safety. Now only Murphy remained, alone, wounded, and convinced the Japanese were closing in. When Harman approached for the final pickup, he saw soldiers breaking from the tree line, rifles raised. For a moment, he believed everything was lost, that after 2 days of peril, the rescue was ending in front of him. But the YR-4B reached Murphy first. The sergeant climbed aboard. The engine sputtered, threatened to stall, and the helicopter sagged toward the jungle canopy. Then, with a final burst of power, it lifted. Harman carried Murphy all the way back to Aberdeen. Only later did he learn the armed men were friendly Chinook troops who had been racing in to help. Harman, trying to escape the enemy, had actually been fleeing from allies. Harman remained with the Air Commandos for weeks, rescuing others until the last R-4 helicopter was damaged beyond repair. Less than a year later, another pilot flew another rescue from a mountain ridge, but Harman's mission had already become the first helicopter combat rescue in history, and it had all begun with an awkward canvas-covered box, a fragile engine, and one quiet pilot who had once written about music in New York. Before we end this documentary, the question now turns to you. How much of this forgotten rescue did you know before watching? Let us know in the comments. Every perspective adds another piece to the story of men who risked everything in the Burma jungles. And if you want more powerful World War II stories just like this, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this documentary with someone who loves history as much as you do. Your support helps keep these stories alive.